Hi, my name is Megan Woolrab, and for my creative project, I decided to revisit an old hobby of mine, which is making ceramics. I first got interested in pottery back in my sophomore year of high school when I took ceramics as my art class for the semester. As I thought back to my old projects, I realized that I've never really made something that I wanted to. It was more a pot for an assignment or a project to develop my skill, but not my creativity. And I wanted to challenge that with this project, so I decided to just sit down, no rules, with a chunk of clay and get to work. And since I've worked with clay before, I wanted to focus on, rather than getting inspired by my own imagination, getting inspired by external sources, so a combination of my own and other artists' work. And first, to get back into the hang of things, I challenged myself to make a simple flower pot, little pinch pot. And to add a little bit of pizzazz to it, I decided to decorate the outside with coils, combining two sort of classical ways to make a pinch pot. I hadn't really seen this method used outside of a couple cute Pinterest posts, so I thought it would be a great way to start my new collection. I experimented with stars, hearts, swirls, a bunch of different designs. I know you can't really see it on them, but most of them ended up falling off in the kiln anyways. So you can see on the top, it kind of broke a little bit. I realized when I took it out of the kiln that I put way too much paint on the outside of it. So that's a lesson that I've learned, is to be very scarce with the paint you use, or else the designs will kind of form into just a blob. So it's not the prettiest pot ever. Didn't turn out exactly the way I had imagined it to, but that doesn't make it any less valuable to me. Throughout this project, I realized that by focusing less on skill and more on doing what I envisioned, the final product was less aesthetically pleasing, but the process of creating it was fulfilling enough. For my second piece, I let myself choose an aspect of nature to base it off of, since that's such a large inspiration for many other artists. As I was creating my pot, I realized that to have a solid collection, there needed to be separate pieces. So there needed to be a variety of different ceramics, flower pots, bowls, vases, other things like that. So I began to turn the pot that I was making into sort of like a bowl pot hybrid, kind of. And making this connection that it kind of has a similar shape to the moon. Ignore the flat bottom, but more of a sphere shape. So I decided to focus my attention less on the bowl itself and more on what the color could signify. So I don't know if you can see, but in the middle, it's pitch black with speckled white to kind of represent the night sky and the stars that you see in that. And then on the outside, I have it painted to represent the face of the moon. It looks a little brown in this lighting, but it's pretty gray. And I feel like this really added an extra layer of realism to the piece because it signifies the night sky and that aspect of nature. So I did make this by throwing on the wheel, which did take me a little bit to get used to, but once I started to get the hang of it, it got pretty easy to do. And to add a little bit of diversity from just pots and bowls, I decided to work on a set of coasters with designs imprinted in them. It was around the end of October when I started working on these, so I decided to make them all Halloween themed. So we have a spider and a spider web. We have a little, kind of dusty, we have a little boo, a ghost, and then a little pumpkin. While making these, I took extra care in not making them too thin to where they would break when I etched the design into them, or break when they got out of the kiln. And rather than focusing my creativity on the actual coaster itself, the shape of it, I wanted to really focus on the design that I put into it and making them very intricate, very clean, I wanted to make them simplistic yet detailed without being too much on the eyes, so I went with just plain black rather than trying to make them colored, because I feel like that would have been a little bit too much. And since they were more difficult than previous pieces I'd done with the thin lines that I had to etch into them, I decided to get a little bit of help from my old ceramics teacher about how I could make the lines as straight and clean as possible without any debris getting in the way. He told me to let the clay dry for a couple days after I'd made the shape before etching it into them, so that was very helpful. And last in my collection is just a traditional coil pot. Because as important as new methods of art are, it's also super important to remember the classic and traditional ways that art came from. During the process of making this pot, I wanted to incorporate something like different into it, such as like an abstract shape or an interesting design. But in the end, I just decided to keep it simple and classic. I decided to make a long and narrow pot using thick coils stacked on top of each other. So these are pretty, I'd say they're pretty thick coils for a coil pot. And during the process of making this, it was around November. So the falling leaves, nature, all the beautiful colors of autumn, I decided to paint this a deep maroon to kind of tie in falling leaves, just the colors that you're seeing outside in nature. And by focusing on my personal artistic vision along with other outside influences such as nature, other artists' work, it has really changed the way that I think about artistic abilities and creativity in general. I think it's impossible for someone to be uncreative or untalented when it comes to art because there's no strict one definition for creativity or for good art. Creativity can either be coming up with an idea yourself or using someone else's work to develop your own. And by implementing and engaging in other art forms and other artists' work, you can only grow your own abilities, which I feel resulted in a more fulfilling experience creating these. And it was less of a chore having to do an assignment for a class and more, I get to create this art. Even if it isn't as good as other people's, it still was fulfilling to create. Thank you.